Okay, does everyone have a copy of the sort of syllabus? I say sort of syllabus for a number of reasons. Does everyone have it? Somebody need it. A better way to put it. Everyone's got it? Okay, great. My understanding is there are those of you who are present. There are other people at home. Those of you who are present can ask questions and interact when we have those opportunities. Jared, are you fielding questions from people at home? No, so if you're at home, we love you. I'll try to repeat questions. Jared, is that helpful for the folks that are at home so that they might not hear people who are here? So what I want to do at the beginning here is just look over the syllabus that I send out for the course, and I will take any questions on that. The schedule in general is to go from now to 9:30, full stop by then. So from 7:30 till basically 8:15, we will go, and I will largely just kind of teach, and then we will stop for a 15-minute break. And then we'll interact a little bit informally over the break, then go for another 45 minutes, and then I'll stop for question and answer. Does that make sense? So you get to do a good little bit of listening, and then time for questions at the break, and then time for question and answer at the end of the class. Course topics that you can see that are there laid out before you. For today, introduction, and then we'll talk about the Bible and social justice. Next month, on the 3rd, a history of social justice and the church, looking at some of the historical material. On the 17th, hopefully by then we've all become friends and we're ready to get really into the difficult stuff, which will be critical race theory and the church. And then on the 21st, a largely, not to say that the other sections won't be practical, but an overwhelmingly practical emphasis on what it means to do justice and love mercy together as a church. If you'd like to reach out to me, my email address is provided for you there. And I see only one person I know for sure, too, that are seminary students. This will be your favorite class all semester. Why? No homework. There's no homework, no reading requirements, no assignments. There's nothing that you have to do other than be here and be nice. So that should be pretty easy for all of us. However, I have provided a rather extensive recommended reading list, and this should help you to see this class against a backdrop. So about a year ago, 13 months ago, I taught a week-long class here, a 3-hour credit course on social justice and the church and reform perspective. It was a 5-day long class, 9 to 4. It was intense. I barely survived. We just moved 4 kids from Florida to Southern California, and then 3 days later I got on a plane and came here and taught for a week, and it got even better. You won't believe this. We have 4 adopted kids, 1 with special needs. I'll show pictures in a moment. We moved to California largely for the sake of a school with a special ed program that goes through high school, but it's California, it's COVID, it's a year ago, and the night before I'm supposed to take my trip, we're at the house of one of my elders and his family, and we get the email that they were shutting down school for the week, and I was leaving the next day to come here. My wife, who's the sweetest, most godly, pious, patient, servant-hearted woman on the planet, and men, if you're married, you should be preparing to argue with me, especially if your wife is sitting there, but my wife almost cussed. She read that email. I mean, I could just tell by the darkness coming over her soul without even reading the email what had happened. So anyway, the Lord was kind. My children did not die. My wife forgave me for taking the trip. And the class actually went fairly well, I think. So this is a Reader's Digest version of a week-long 3-hour course. So I'm kind of cherry picking from the class. If at times it looks like I have too much material, it's because I do, and I always do. I travel with this bag, which has an iPad and a laptop up there, and it's still probably about 30 pounds without those 2 things. So I always tend to over-prepare. And that'll probably be the case in the class here. I do want to say a little bit about the recommended reading. This is a long list of books. You never know. Some of you may not read anything on this list. Others may be really interested in a diverse list. And so just to go over the categories, classic works, The Souls of Black Folks in Uncle Tom's Cabin. If you're a reader of the classics, those are just two standards on the subject. You might not agree with everything, but as go classic works, things that would predate critical race theory and social justice, George Floyd, all of that, these are just standard text. Political books, I'm not advocating a view here, but I'm probably advocating a view here. So Candace Owens, what's interesting, for me, a number of the authors I'm referring to here are black people who come from a political perspective that is not woke. Some of the books that I have on this reading list are from black people who are very woke. So this is a balanced list. I'm not giving you a, here's just a sanitized, sort of whitewashed reading list, pardon the pun. It's a pretty good pun. But it's sort of a balanced list. So some of these political works are largely on a more conservative point of view and will be helpful. But then there's another category of secular critical works that are not Christian, not ideologically, politically conservative. And these are what I would say, these are the giants in the land. Intellectually, these are the giants. If you want to read the other side for the sake of intellectual objectivity, these are some of the things that you might want to read. The New Jim Crow, critical theory. The next one is the sort of foundation upon which a lot of critical race theory is built. We'll get to that in week 3. Intersectionality, very important line of thinking just regarding the place of particularly black women that are not altogether perceived as black or women and have fallen somewhere in between the crack. And that largely has set the stage for a lot of things with critical race theory, people like Kimberly Crenshaw, Robin DiAngelo, and others. Richard Delgado, there should be an O there. Critical race theory, if you were a college student, that would be the standard text you would read at a secular college campus on critical race theory. Robin DiAngelo, arguably probably the most popular secular book on the subject, and maybe one of the most rhetorically embellished books on the subject that I've read yet. And I've read quite a bit on both sides of the playing field here, so I'm heavily critical of the book, but she's so heavily influential. I mean, she just makes it in the news, just all the time. So then coming down, secular works, pushing back on woke ideology and critical race theory. This is a very important section to me. It's a really important section to me because these two books I'm referring to, John McWhorter and then the one by Pluckrose and Lindsay, these are non-Christians but highly educated. John McWhorter teaches at Columbia University, literary specialist, and the book title says it all, Woke Racism, How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America. So you have a black, secular, atheistic liberal pushing back on woke ideology. That mixes things up a little bit. The second one, Pluckrose and Lindsay are highly competent scholars in postmodern theory, and they are pushing back highly against critical race theory in this book, Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. So they're liberals, saying that even as a liberal, this is bad juju, and it doesn't even help the liberal agenda, let alone what many Christians might themselves be advocating for as well. So then the next section, which is pretty long and regrettably longer than the section that follows it, these are evangelical authors, many of them you've probably already heard about, who are critical and I would say sort of woke-esque at varying levels and degrees, identifying with woke theology from Tabiti to Anthony Bradley, whom I've met, Anthony Carter, Micah Edmondson, a friend of mine, J. Daniel Hayes, Timothy Keller, Martin Luther King Jr., you know him, Eric Mason, John Piper, Jamar Tisby. These are all people to varying levels who are evangelical Christians. MLK's, there's some nuances there. But generally speaking, recognized as Christian voices who are speaking into some aspect of this conversation, largely from a Christian point of view. Then the next section, which I wish were longer than it is, these are evangelical authors who are pushing back on what I will refer to as woke or critical race theory ideology. So people like Scott David Allen, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice, everything by Neil Shenvi. If you don't know Neil Shenvi's name, you need to. If you haven't been to his website, he's the guy. He's the guy you really wish were teaching this class. He and I just did a conference together a couple months ago in Grand Rapids. The only thing I don't like about him is he talks even faster than I do, and that's saying something, because I motor along. But man, that guy is like a freight train on speed. I mean, he really just cooks and just moves along. But if you go to his website, it's really, really helpful. He is a PhD from Berkeley in like quantum physics or something I can't even pronounce, who while a PhD student at Berkeley got converted and has become a rock solid evangelical. So he and I have spent hours and hours together. Really like this guy. He takes a beating, by the way, for pushing back on critical race theory the way that he does. So I appreciate his work. I feel protective of him and his wife and his kids. Thaddeus Williams' book is the book I would most likely suggest if you were wanting to do something in a church with teenagers, college kids, an adult Sunday school class. His book, Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth, 12 Questions Christians Should Ask About Social Justice, is really just a good book. It's accessible. He's a PhD from Utrecht, so he spreekt Nederlands, which means a little bit around here. He's also teaching at Biola as an evangelical Christian, and he's on our team. But this is a good book, and I would encourage you to consider using it if you're looking for something to read. The next guy is a madman. I would avoid him at all costs. We'll talk a little bit in the last day, especially a couple places where it'll come up sublimely, on the role of women and the church, and then a little bit about abuse in the church. Regrettably, those are things, if you're going to talk about social justice in the church, it's not all about ethnicity. There are some issues related to gender and abuse in the church. The conference we just did in Orlando had Darby Strickland as one of our speakers, who's published, in my view, just the best stuff, the most safe and reliable stuff out there currently. She's really good. CCEF, Christian Counseling Education Foundation, is arguably the most reformed, theologically conservative, and reliable material out there. And so for pastors, lay people alike, I want you to know who Darby is. And if you're looking for a resource in the church, she had the best line. She started out her lecture by saying, "I'm the one person in the room you never want to have to call. Mm-hmm. And the one person, if you ever need me, you'll really need me." So, it is what it is, and I'm not going to avoid the hard stuff in our class. We're going to talk about some of it. Questions on the syllabus before I move on to other things? All right. So, excuse me, turning 50 and hitting 13 all at the same time. All right, so this is my family. It's my wife, Heather. My oldest is 15, that's Kira. Our second oldest, Carl Voss, is 14. He's our son with special needs. He's on the autism spectrum. He's the reason why we moved to California for the most part. We needed a reformed Christian school that had a special ed program that goes all the way through high school. And so we moved out there largely for the sake of our son and his needs. And this is Liam. William Warfield. So we have Gerhardus Voss and William Warfield. We got the Princeton band back together, Voss and Warfield. This is nerdy humor. If you know what I'm talking about, that says something about you. You can decide if it's good or not. And then this is my kryptonite. This is Liara. She is 3 now. If she makes it to 5 feet tall, we will all be surprised, but she has the largest personality on all the planet. So why am I here? Well, I don't like talking about this subject. I really don't. I have been physically threatened over this subject. I'm not exaggerating. I had a guy tell me at a conference, speaking on this stuff and pushing back a little bit on some of the woke nuances. He said to me, I'm 6'3", 220, I can handle myself reasonably well. And he said, you know, you may look like a bodyguard, but if you keep talking like that, you're going to need a bodyguard. It was a very sobering comment. He wasn't kidding. He's like, this could get ugly. This is a subject to me, it'd be great if we were just talking about like Hebrews 11 or evangelism or discipleship, right? And at the same time, this is a subject that means a lot to me because my family, in many ways, like embodies the tension of the whole deal. My dad is black. My mom is white. Say a little bit more about that. My wife is white. 2 of my kids are black. 2 of my kids are white. Like, we're just sort of the summary of the whole complicated mess that the subject has become. But I don't address this just as an academic or a pastor. I address it foremost as a dad who has teenage kids that wrestle in their own skin, like literally, like, are we black or white as a family? And, you know, our church is mostly white. Our school is almost entirely white, but my skin is dark. So where do I fit? Who am I in the world? Who am I in Christ? Who am I in the church? To me, these issues are toxic. They are poisonous. They are dangerous. It's like a snake on the playground, right? And the problem with the snake on a playground is you might not like it or welcome it, but you can't avoid it. And you need to engage it. And my angst in the whole thing is that from my point of view, which doesn't mean I'm right, but from my point of view, I think even largely speaking, Christians have begun to engage the conversation apart from the Bible and are embracing narratives, worldview, and ideology that are unbiblical and unhelpful, and that concerns me. It's affecting the church. It's affecting pastors. It's affecting people that you probably know and love. And, you know, there was a joke back in the day when I was in seminary that had a counseling program that everyone in the counseling program needed counseling. Right? See the joke. My dad has a counseling degree, so I can see the truth of it. And my guess is if you're here, it's because probably in one way or another, you've been slightly stung by this subject. Right? There's some way in which it comes close to home. Your family, your church, your friends, you've been cornered in a conversation and just not had a good argument. You know, you had kids or grandkids that kind of pushed you on it, and you're trying to think through, like, how do I respond biblically? And this stuff matters. So I recently moved from Florida to California. And my son Carl there, you recognize him. This is a young black man whose birth mom is a crack addict prostitute whose birth dad is a drug lord. And they've grown up in our home. One of the hardest things about moving from Florida to California was actually this young man and his sister who called my wife and me mom and dad. Our church in St. Augustine, Florida, literally straddled the geographic fence between white and somewhat affluent and black and impoverished. Parents, no parents. Better school, not as good schools. In the South, many cities would have a street in their city named Division Street. And Division Street was the street line where black people had to be on the right side of that street when the sun went down, and white people could go on either sides. So they lived on the other side. Our church was just on this side. And these pictures just sort of represent, you know, what our church was in many ways, which was sort of an embodiment of, I think, by God's grace, positive effort to be the church on both sides of the fence. So for me, this is a very real, live discussion. It's not abstract. It's not just in books. I've been a church planner most of my life and have been happily engaging people on both sides of the fence. So I want to come back for a moment. Just give me a second. See if I got a slide ahead of myself. Okay. I know I just ruined my slides that are coming next. I want to say just a little bit, if you don't mind, about my own backstory. It might be helpful to say a few things just to give you a sense of who's the crazy guy teaching the class. So I grew up outside the church, which in God's providence is something that is sad for me, and at the same time something I think God has used to shape me. I was mentioning to someone earlier, I probably feel more comfortable around non-Christians than Christians. And at 50 years old, just about half my life has been outside the church. A little bit more of it technically has been inside the church. My dad, who's black, abandoned our family when I was 12. So my dad is black, my mom is white. He was a career Marine, 26 years in the Marine Corps. And when I was 12 years old, he abruptly left our family for another lady and just like left one day and never came back. So we went from being a two-income family in a middle-class, mostly white neighborhood to being impoverished and literally moving into the hood. Like when I say the hood, I mean like drug deals. My next door neighbor was a prostitute, like with the red light and everything. You know, when I'm in middle school, going into high school with a younger brother. You know, so pretty much from age 12 through high school, I was doing every drug you can imagine and all the other dumb stuff that you don't even want to hear me talk about. By the time I graduated high school, I'd been shot at twice. I'd been to jail. I failed my senior year of high school and had to repeat it. I graduated high school, second year of senior year, without having read a single book. So I wasn't dumb. I could wing it pretty well, but I had no interest in applying myself. And so just kind of, did that. I was voted by my high school senior class the most likely to live in a Volkswagen van forever. I'm still not quite sure what that means. It might actually have been a compliment. In high school, I had dreadlocks down to here. I loved the Grateful Dead. I loved Bob Marley. I loved Metallica. I was into all kinds of crazy stuff, violence and stupidity on the one hand, and just like, let's be a hippie and smoke pot on the other hand. So a lot of confusion. After high school, I moved down to the beach and was living with a bunch of partiers, started a recreation degree, which is why I'm such a fun Orthodox Presbyterian minister. I have a degree in recreation, and it takes that for most OPC ministers. So I dropped out of that college degree halfway through to follow the Grateful Dead around the country. So I literally sold everything that I had, jumped in a car with my brother, 2 guitars, 2 backpacks, 2 surfboards, and around the country we went with some controlled substances that we were selling for profit. And after about a year of that, I got tired of hippies. I got tired of patchouli. I can smell patchouli from a mile away. Lady in our church this past week came to our house with just the faintest bit of it because of some tinnitus or something going on. I'm like, you're wearing patchouli. She's like, there's no way you can tell that, but your wife and I were debating whether or not you could. So after a year of hippies, I just couldn't take it. I decided to go back to North Carolina and finish this college degree. I got on a Greyhound bus in Southern California. My older sister was experimenting with Christianity at the time. I'm not even sure she was converted. She gave me her Bible at a bus stop. I'd never read the Bible, didn't like Christians. When I was growing up in rural North Carolina, most of my party buddies went to church on Sunday and then came to my house to party afterwards. Didn't like the church. Most of the racists I knew were church-going people, right? Country club, church, racism, package deal in rural North Carolina in the late 70s, early 80s. So anyway, no interest in church, but I'd never read the Bible and thought, well, put it in my backpack. A couple of days go by and I play guitar in the back of the bus, and eventually my fingers are kind of tapped out. So I decided, why not? I'll read. So I take out the Bible, and my little brother's name is Mark. And then the table of contents, I saw my brother's name and thought, why is he in the Bible? Talk about sibling jealousy. So I'm like, what in the world? So anyway, my little brother's name's in the Bible, and I thought, well, I'll read it. So I read the Gospel of Mark, and that's when the Lord confronted me with the fact that I was a sinner, that he was holy, and this was not going to work out well. The gospel really pierced my heart. The idea of God as a father probably pierced my heart just as much. I really and sincerely think I was converted on that bus. Got on the bus, long-haired, stinking deadhead. Got off the bus a week later, longer-haired, stinkier, and probably truly converted. Like I made a beeline when I got back for church. and it was the most humbling experience of my life to walk into suit and tie Bible Baptist church, and just like it was so hard, right? It was hard for me culturally, ethnically, with my racial profile, just my experiences as a teenager. I got baptized multiple times in Baptist churches because I kept walking the aisle. I'd walk the aisle for anything. If that's what it took to get a little more saved, I wanted all of it. So I kept walking, and I'm not sure how many baptisms it takes, but I'm covered. In the ocean, swimming pool, church, covered. Literally covered. So I know it only takes one, by the way. So then meandered into little Bible church. It was charismatic for about 30 minutes. Really wasn't working. Ended up with a little church that went to Ligonier stuff. That's where I discovered Reformed theology, total game changer, serious intellectual Christianity, and just fell in love with it. Ended up going to a Reformed seminary. Met my wife in Bible college. I married the president's daughter. I was praying for a godly, athletic, hippie chick. So you never know. There could be somebody out there praying just for you with specific details, and you'll both know when that thing comes to pass. So Heather and I have been married now for 25 years. We went to seminary together, and then after that I became a church planner for the OPC in 2001. I've planted 2 churches. After seminary, did an additional THM degree, and then did PhD work in the Netherlands. And this brings me to our study. So when I was doing my doctoral work, I was forced against my will, and I mean it, like I didn't want to do it. I was forced against my will to read a lot of postmodern literature. So my dissertation became, it's not where it began, it became preaching Christ in the Old Testament in a postmodern context. So I read tons and tons and tons of secular and evangelical postmodernism. So when a handful of years ago, this big splash hit with critical race theory and all the different intellectual stuff attached to that, for me personally, I recognized the smell. Like I had read Derrida and Foucault and Judith Butler and Charles Taylor and many others that kind of undergird critical race theory from a postmodern secular perspective. And it really concerned me not only to recognize this in critical race theory, but be with me here, but to see how many Christians were jumping on for the ride because of a sensitivity to the social activism side of it. So you have the social activism side, but then you have the anti-Christian intellectual worldview side. And so for me, it was like watching a hook get in a fish's mouth, pulling young person, especially after a young person, away from the church, away from their parents, away from the Bible. And to me, it was kind of a stop the madness kind of thing to say, no, we need to interact with this. This is not good. So I, on the one hand, tell you all this because, for me personally, I will at times push and probably make you uncomfortable because I do think things like racism exists because sin exists, right? I also reject outright some of the categories that are embodied in critical race theory because they're anti-biblical categories. So I'm going to push on both sides, and you'll just have to, kind of walk the trail with me. So that's a good bit of intro, but maybe some things that are helpful to set the stage here for what we're going to talk about. So now, what I want to do is get into our Bibles for the rest of the night. My sense of schedule is very postmodern, by the way. What feels like an hour to you may only feel like 15 minutes to me. Anyway, just for fun. So in the longer version of the class, I got into and unpacked these 7 categories biblically in the first couple days. We don't have time for all that. But here's what I want to do. I'm going to deal with point 1 tonight. We're going to talk about it a good bit. But what I want to say now is this. I would encourage you that if you're really interested in this subject, to think about these categories, maybe even make the list, and in some time, some way, contemplate what the Bible says about these 7 topics. Because here's my concern. Christians, in my view, are having this conversation about social justice with their Bibles closed. And the Bible says so much about this subject. And not only does it say a lot about the subject, it says it better. It says it from God's point of view. It says it with categories, clarity, and helpfulness that our secular friends that are trying to address these subjects will never be able to offer us. In other words, the world can't fix the world's problems, but the Bible can. But part of fixing the world's problems is first rightly defining the world's problems. Okay? So, justice, race, reconciliation, oppression, mercy, forgiveness. Those are all things that in a certain sense, maybe leaving off forgiveness, those are all things that you hear about a lot in the world and in secular literature, right? But the Bible has a view on these things that is different than the worldly literature. But things like forgiveness and the church, the world has no clue about. What the world wants to be, in a certain sense, is the colony of heaven, right? Secular approaches to eschatology, if we just do this, the world will become a great place, right? Like that's been tried over and over and over in history. The only problem is every time it ever tried, the world only got worse when they were done, right? So trying to create this utopia, this heaven on earth apart from God, apart from the gospel, has never worked in history. What we need to do is get back to our Bibles as we address some very important subjects that the world is wrestling with right now. So another way to say it is, this is a great time to be the church. It's a really great time to be the church. It's a challenging time. I get it. Right? There are all kinds of pressures upon the church. If you live in the U.S., there are pressures upon the church. If you live in, the now communistic state of Canada, there are tremendous, sorry about that, Eric, but just deal with it. There are tremendous pressures upon the church, right? Things that, that just attach to Christian conscience have been illegalized, right? The church has been accused of being the great racist of history. Every good thing that you've inherited from your parents has now been described as privilege for which you should feel guilty and give back and denounce your parents and the people that postured you to inherit these things. Like, on the one hand, there's madness, but what a great time to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world and to offer the cool cup of water that only the gospel can give to a world that is parched and dragging its empty bucket around the desert sea of secular ideas. So you have Voltaire and the Apostle Paul. All right, let's get into the Bible. And don't worry, we're going to move along at a pace that we can handle, hopefully you can handle. And what I want to say and demonstrate here, and this is just picking one of those 7 outline points that you saw before. What I want to say is if you think the world is interested in justice, the Bible is far more. Right? The Bible is all about justice. The Bible actually, in its vocabulary, justice is one of the more high-frequency occurring terms in the Old and New Testaments. Justice is all over the Bible. In many ways, you could say justice is the theme of the Bible because God is a just God. The gospel is about Him satisfying His justice while showing mercy at the same time. Everything that the world is shouting about and all up in arms about, it is in a certain sense doing a poor copy of what the Bible already does quite well. The Bible is all about justice because justice is bound up in the heart of God Himself. So I'm going to just go down my verses. The one thing you may accuse me of is, wow, that was too much Bible. Well, that doesn't offend me. I'm pretty hard to offend. I have teenagers. Deuteronomy 32:4, the rock, referring to the Lord, His work is perfect, for all His ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is He. Where does justice come from? It comes from God Himself. Plato would often refer to, and then it kind of merged into what Immanuel Kant referred to as a categorical imperative, this idea that whatever good is, that they're like ethical categories floating around in the universe to which God Himself is obligated to submit. It's kind of like the Christmas song. I'm going to get in trouble. You better be good for goodness sake. What does that mean? You know what that is? That's Kantianism for kids. Where do you find goodness sake written? It's the strangest line, right? You better be good for goodness sake. And it gets even worse because there's this old guy who's like creeping around. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. That's kind of dark, right? But this idea of for goodness sake is a very Kantian idea. Like goodness is just this abstract thing. No, in the Bible's view, goodness is bound. It's bound up in the heart of God. The 10 Commandments are like 10 streams flowing from the character of God, each in their own way revealing the goodness and the justice, the beauty of God himself. Right? So justice is not this abstract category just kind of floating around in the universe, a rule that God must obey. Justice is what God himself is. He is a just God. He is just in all of his ways. Justice emanates from the heart of God himself. So any meaningful discussion about justice ought to begin with the doctrine of God. God is just. Justice flows from God. Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? The answer implied is no. Psalm 9:7. But the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice. As a king, he rules in justice. He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the steadfast love of the Lord. God loves justice because God is justice. Psalm 37:8. For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. God makes a distinction between what is just and what is unjust. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. Now this one, you guys all know, Lamentations chapter 3. You guys all know that? The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone in silence when it is laid on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust. There may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes. Let him be filled with insults. For the Lord will not cast off forever. But though he has caused grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of man, to crush underfoot all the prisoners of the earth, to deny a man justice in the presence of the Most High, to subvert a man in his lawsuit. The Lord does not approve. The Lord is the Lord of justice, and he's not only just in himself and in his ways, the Lord has regard for justice or the lack of justice among men and women. In courts, God wants justice, right? The scales, God wants justice. When people take oaths, right? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, right? Is because God is a God of truth and justice. Okay? Justice is not only bound up in the heart of God, in a general sense, it's bound up in the Messianic King. So the book of Proverbs, really wonderful. The book of Proverbs is written from a father to a son, where the father is telling the son how to walk in righteousness in this present evil age. Wisdom becomes the tangible embodiment of biblical precepts in a variety of different creative contexts. right? So wisdom is the lived out righteousness and justice of God in all kinds of different varied contexts, right? There's not just one way to be wise. Walking in wisdom, Colossians 4, walking in wisdom, the book of Proverbs, is living out the ethical integrity of God in all kinds of varied contexts. When you get to the end of the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 30, I read a proverb every day. They correspond to the calendar days of the month. You get to the end of the book of Proverbs, and it becomes extremely Christological. It asks this question, who is the Lord and what is his son's name? Tell me if you know. So you have the Father speaking to the Son, and then the question, who is the Son? Right? And then you go from Proverbs 30 to Proverbs 31. I'm not good in math. I have to say things slowly. Where you have the picture of the perfect woman, right? It's like Mount Sinai for women, by the way. If you actually quantify her day, she doesn't sleep. She never messes up. Everything she touches turns to gold. She's completely perfect, right? Nothing goes wrong. The perfect woman and the perfect husband, the Son and his bride. It's very gospel-centered. It's like the Old Testament version of Ephesians 5. So you have this Son, who I'm going to say is the Messiah, the Son of wisdom. Proverbs 1, why is the book written? To receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. Why? Because the Messianic King will incarnate the justice of God. What we could say about the doctrine of God in sort of broad, abstract sense, God is, right? The Son will incarnate. Proverbs 2, verses 6 through 9. I told you I'd go fast. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. So my point in reading all this is because you should recognize terms like equity, right? Justice. If you're turning on the news, you're hearing those terms all the time, but the world is trying to define them apart from God. My point is to say the Bible's all over these categories. It just drips with justice. Wisdom, Proverbs 8, is to walk in righteousness and justice. I walk in the way of righteousness in the paths of justice. To do, not just think, not just be. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. The church needs to get this point, right? To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable than sacrifice. You should be a little uncomfortable because doing justice is something God requires, not just worship. Isaiah 9:7, referring to Jesus, very messianic prophecy. Of the increase of government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness. From this time forth and forevermore, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. God is zealous for justice. What gets God pumped up is justice. What gets God angry is injustice. That's sobering. That's very sobering. Therefore, the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. The Lord is exalted, for he dwells on high. He will fill Zion with justice and righteousness. I want to pause here and say something. I know we're going to take our break. The church, and I've got a lot more to say, the church should be the safest and most just place in all the world. Because God is a God of justice, and his temple that incarnates his character is his church. For abused women, for the marginalized, for the woman at the well, for the man with the withered hand, for the discarded and unusable in the world's eyes. The church should be the safest place and the most just place in all the world, because God dwells in the midst of her, and God himself is a God of justice. All right, take a break.